What's up, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kennahan, and today I am here to recap the Washington Commanders 2025 NFL Draft class. It is now complete. All three of the days, all 7 of the rounds, all 250 plus picks have been selected, and it's all over. The marathon has come to an end, and the Washington Commanders finished the draft with 5 selections, making 5 picks. They did not trade up at any point. They did not trade down at any point. It was a pretty basic and you could say maybe boring draft in terms of the action involved within probably the war room. It was I already talked about the first 2 days. There was only 2 selections there, 3 selections today, a 4th rounder, a 6th, and a 7th rounder for the Commanders, which again, they did not move up, they did not move down, and they just stayed where they were for all 5 of their picks this year. So we knew it was kind of going to be more of a kind of basic draft, maybe coming in with, especially after round 1, they selected Josh Connolly and they didn't trade back. It was definitely going to be more of a basic draft where, just go in, make your selections, head out at the end of the day. And that is exactly what happened for Adam Peters, Lance Newmark, and the Washington Commanders. Here is the rundown for who was selected for the Washington Commanders in this year's NFL Draft. Round 1, pick number 29, Josh Connolly Jr., the offensive tackle out of Oregon. I've talked about him in the podcast 2 nights ago, where I think Connolly is going to be a Week 1 starter for the Washington Commanders. Then in round 2, Trey Amos, the cornerback out of Ole Miss. I talked about him last night, kind of in depth, but basically some just basic stuff here from Trey Amos. He's a cornerback that's going to be able to play outside corner for you. He's going to be a starter in that rotation starting from week number 1. I think it's a great selection for Washington. I know they have similar grades on both Connolly and Amos, so getting both of those guys without having to trade up was huge for Adam Peters and, his war room. Now we get to the new selections here on day 3. Round 4, Jalen Lane, the wide receiver out of Virginia Tech, was the pick at number 128. Jalen Lane is someone who's going to be great for Washington, especially in more area on not just the offensive side of the ball, but also as a special teamer. Adam Peters said it in his draft call to Jalen Lane. Jalen Lane was their top-ranked punt returner when he was on the board. Or when they ended up picking him. So it was more than just having another wide receiver in the wide receiver room. There was a pretty major gap at the punt returner / kick returner position ever since Jamison Crowder kind of left. And now we haven't re-signed him yet. So there's been a pretty big gap on who that punt returner is going to be, which has not been a storyline that a lot of people have talked about yet in the offseason. But Jalen Lane is set to be that punt returner for Washington. In round 6, now at pick number 205, Kane Medrano, the linebacker out of UCLA. He's kind of more of a, box safety hybrid type thing. We look at kind of what Dom Hampton was last year in terms of he could play both safety and linebacker. Medrano is more of a safety playing linebacker than more of kind of a safety skill set playing linebacker rather than a actual safety that is playing in the linebacker position, if you know what I mean. Like Medrano's got the safety build. He's a smaller linebacker. He's got to put some weight on. I'll get into more depth about all these guys, of course, in a little bit, but that's a pick that I'm gonna be pretty excited about. He wasn't really on my radar for Washington, but it's going to be a pick after doing some research that I am pretty excited about. And then Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt, the running back out of Arizona, was the selection at number 245. So Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt was on a top 30 visit for the Washington Commanders about a couple of weeks ago. I believe he was at that Top Golf event for Washington as well. So Crosky-Merritt was someone that's been on Washington's radar. He's got a pretty unique story. He's been through a lot in the last 2 or so years. He's on the older side for running back, but there's a kind of a reason why for that too. So I'm gonna talk about Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt towards the end of this episode as well. But that is the draft class for the Washington Commanders. 5 guys: Connolly, Amos, Lane, Medrano, and Crosky-Merritt. Jalen Lane was the only team captain from these 5, but of course, there's a lot of different other factors. I know a lot of people say or ask about who was the team captain, because we know how Ron Rivera loved his team captains, and even Adam Peters to an extent loves the team captains as well, or selecting the team captains. But Jalen Lane in this scenario was the only one that was a team captain. So you look at these guys, Trey Amos, he's a senior, Lane's a senior, Madrano is a senior, Krosky Merritt's a senior. Connolly's the only one that was an underclassman selected in this draft class. Some other trends I'll talk about in a second, but speed is also something to look at as well. But let's just dive into these picks. We'll start with Josh Connolly Jr. out of Oregon. I've talked about him on Thursday, but after watching his tape, he moves very well for his size. He's 6'4", 315 is listed here. He's only 21 years old. He moves super well. Now he's got to put on a little bit of weight, which you could also say maybe is a trend for these prospects that Washington was able to select, because they are pretty much all of them are on the lighter side, except maybe for Trey Amos, I would say. But a lot of them are on the lighter side for their positions. But Josh Connolly Jr. is someone I think who moves very well for his size, and he's got accurate hand placements and initial strikes. I was very impressed with what I've seen from him. Definitely needs to put on some weight, because when he does get beat, he kind of just gets beat with the bull rush move. He gets beat because of his power, or his lack of power, but of the edge rusher or pass rusher's power move. So that is something that Connolly needs to work on. Again, I still think he's going to be a starter week number 1. I would expect him to probably be the starter at right tackle if I were to guess week 1. But again, I'm looking forward to it. I think he's got some stuff to work on still, but he's also just a very good pick. I think this was a good selection for Washington at pick number 29, and someone that I think is also just going to be able to develop with some of these younger offensive linemen like Brandon Coleman. And even if you want to put, I know Sam Cosmi's already on a second contract, but even if you want to put like Cosmi in there as well, I believe he's only 26 or 27 at this point. So there's a lot of different guys on this line that can kind of build up together. Laramie Tunsil. I mean, we've got this offensive line kind of filled out for multiple years. For multiple years now with Josh Connolly out there. You can never have too much offensive line depth, in my opinion, especially with the shortage of good offensive linemen in this league, especially what you see in free agency. There are no more good offensive linemen in free agency. That is because teams are starting to value offensive linemen to a point where they are not letting them hit free agency pretty much no matter what. So you're really only going to be able to get these offensive linemen through the draft and develop these guys. And Josh Connolly, I think, is a perfect example. I mentioned it on Thursday's pod, but Connolly was the practice player of the week for offensive linemen for his team at the Senior Bowl. He was voted on by edge rushers and the defensive line. So it just shows how much respect also his peers within this draft class have for a guy like Connolly, and overall just how good he is as well. I think Connolly is definitely worth taking at number 29, and maybe he wasn't the obvious choice for Washington. I know a lot of us thought maybe it was going to be Donovan Ezuraku, the edge rusher out of Boston College, or a guy like Travion Henderson, the running back out of Ohio State. Maybe a different position. Offensive line was probably not, the number 1 position that many fans, you could say, thought Washington was going to go in the first round, especially after trading for Laramie Tunsil. But still, there was a gap at right tackle. Andrew Wiley is not consistent enough to be a full-time starter at right tackle. Bringing in a guy like Connolly, you can play him at right tackle. I know it'll be an adjustment switching from left to right, but if he does develop into being that starting right tackle of the future, that's awesome. And then eventually, when maybe Laramie Tunsil is starting to fall off because of his age, or Laramie Tunsil, ends up leaving Washington, Connolly can now flip back over to that left side for the Washington Commanders. So it gives a lot of flexibility for Washington as well. Plus, of course, Brandon Coleman, the 3rd round pick last year for Washington, who played and started at left tackle for the Commanders, especially during the playoff stretch down the back half of the year. He can now move inside to left guard, which I really think he's going to be a very good left guard in this league, or a very good guard, offensive guard, you could say, in this league. So I'm very excited as well, just the flexibility that it brings for this offensive line. And it kind of, not only is Connolly going to be able to play right tackle, but it puts Brandon Coleman in a position for him to succeed at a higher rate as well. As there were some struggles over there at left tackle, but eventually, it's probably going to look like Brandon Coleman is going to be a starting guard in this league. So Josh Connolly is someone that I'm very excited about. Again, you spent a 1st round pick on him. He's someone that Again, he's going to be someone who's going to be a starter, in my opinion, in this league for a very long time. And I think, you know, for Washington and Adam Peters, it was a very good selection, and I'm excited about it because even though it might not be the number one position of need, you can never have too many good offensive linemen, in my opinion. And protecting Jane Daniels, I am never going to get mad about. So yeah, that is pretty much what I got to say about Josh Connolly. Then Washington went on into night number 2, and with the 61st overall pick, they did not trade up, they did not trade back. They made a selection at number 61, and they picked Trey Amos, the cornerback out of Ole Miss. So Amos is someone who was at the Senior Bowl. I got a chance to watch him there. He was awesome to watch. He really was awesome to watch. I had a high second round grade on him. So again, he was one of my favorite guys in this class, especially at the cornerback position. I thought potentially he could be in play for Washington at number 29, but it just felt like his stock among NFL teams has kind of fallen off in the last about week or two for some reason. But I think he definitely deserves to be selected in the second round. And Washington getting him at number 61 was crazy. 61 is the back half of the second round, one of the final picks of the second round. You look at these numbers for Trey Amos and what he's going to bring. He's 23 years old, 6'1", 190, again out of Ole Miss. 85.6 coverage grade, completion percentage of only 51.6%, passer rating allowed last season of 54.5. He is someone that mainly played outside corner for Ole Miss, and I expect him to play outside corner for Washington as well, but he can also go to the inside if needed. Now, if I would expect, I mentioned this in yesterday's podcast, but my expectation now for the secondary is Marshawn Lattimore, Mike Sanderstill, and Trey Amos all will be in a rotation on the outside, and then with some packages having Mike Sanderstill inside on the slot in the slot position, and then on the inside in the slot position for the Washington Commanders, you would have a rotation of Jonathan Jones, the newly acquired Jonathan Jones, coming over from New England as a free agent, and then as well you would have Noah Igbenogany, who Washington re-signed. Igbenogany was surprisingly one of the best slot corners in the league last season, one of the highest graded in on PFF at least. And so you're going to have a pretty solid secondary if they can stay healthy. I know that's a big question with Marshawn Lattimore. Sanders still seems just be like just invincible, and I feel he will be able to play. I mean, again, not to jinx it, but I feel like he'd be able to play the entire season. But I'm mainly just looking at Marshawn Lattimore, and if he can stay healthy, that's going to be a big question. But if Lattimore does stay healthy, you've got Lattimore, Amos, you've got Sanders still, Igbenogany, if he can just repeat what he did in 2024, just be close to repeating that. And then Jonathan Jones as well, who I think is in for a good year. That is a very good cornerback room. If I'm Dan Quinn and Joe Witt looking at my cornerback room, I am very satisfied with that. So again, they spent some capital in the secondary, and they went up and they selected Trey Amos in the second round. I like this pick a lot in terms of the scheme and what is Amos good at, what is he not good at. He's kind of just good at a little bit of everything. In my opinion, I think he's a little bit better as a zone coverage cornerback rather than a press man coverage cornerback, and I expect Washington to play a little bit of both this year. Probably play more so into a man coverage side, as that's what they did more of down the stretch of the season last year, especially in the playoffs. But I'm looking forward to seeing Amos as both a press man and a zone coverage corner. I think Amos's kind of instincts in zone is awesome to watch. I think what he's able to do, just kind of see all around him, even though he may be just looking at the cornerback, but just having a feel of where the receiver is at the time and stuff like that is just something that not many cornerbacks have. But Trey Amos, in my opinion, has that trait. So I'm very impressed with what I've seen from Trey Amos in watching his film back, and I'm looking forward to him. He might be my favorite pick, actually, from this class. Now that I'm thinking about it, he might be my favorite pick because I think of the 5 guys from this draft class, I think Amos could have the best rookie season out of all of them. Which, again, it's the second round pick, not the first round pick, but I think Amos it gives me, in terms of his mentality and what he can do in the secondary, it does give me Mike Sanderstill vibes. In terms of someone who's going to go in there, he's going to fight, he's going to fight for his job and start at cornerback and show it on the field too and be physical. I like Amos a lot. And I think, Washington, something they've struggled with, especially defensively, is turnovers. And Trey Amos may not be, a turnover machine, but he did have 2 pick sixes last year for Ole Miss, 3 interceptions overall, and I get like, come on, like this is someone that I'm looking forward to, and I think could definitely, have that sense of almost a receiver and be able to have good hands or good enough hands to come down with a lot of interceptions. Just plus you add that onto his instincts as well in zone coverage. He could have a multiple interception season. Or at least I'm hoping he has a multiple interception season for the Washington Commanders in just his rookie year. So I am very excited with what Trey Amos can bring for the Washington Commanders in 2025. But let's move on to day 3. There was 3 selections for the Washington Commanders on day 3. It started off with Jalen Lane, the wide receiver from Virginia Tech, was drafted in the 4th round, pick number 128. He's 23 years old pretty much by the time the season starts. He'll be 23. He's 5'10", 196 pounds. Again, Virginia Tech. He's not from Virginia or from anywhere near Ashburn, really. He's from South Carolina. But you look at his numbers, yeah, you might see, the grade against man coverage is pretty low. The contested catch rate is pretty low. They were drafting Jalen Lane to be more than just a wide receiver. And that was pretty clear from the phone call that Adam Peters had with Jalen Lane and just the overall conversation. Lane last season, you could say, may not have been the most productive, right? In 2022, which was his sophomore year, I believe, he was the most productive, having over 900 yards and 5 touchdowns. And since then, he hasn't even been able to hit the 600 mark for Virginia Tech, but that's not entirely his fault. Virginia Tech last season had it was a movie at the quarterback position for Virginia Tech. They had a lot going on at the quarterback position, and it was not good. So Jalen Lane's production has kind of dipped over the last couple of years because of that. But I also think the reason why Washington went and selected a guy like Jalen Lane in the 4th round is, like I mentioned earlier, to be the punt returner for the Washington Commanders for the next few years. They love Jalen Lane, I think, as a punt returner. He had a punt return touchdown against Marshall last season. I believe it was from 60 or so yards. So that also adds on to it. But overall, I mean, you look at his missed tackles forced, 13 missed tackles forced last year. How about his yards after catch per reception? 8.3, which was tied for 16th. I'm looking at Jalen Lane to be that speedster for the Washington Commanders, someone who's going to be able to kind of replace that De'Ami Brown and the De'Ami Brown production that De'Ami Brown brought for Washington last season. So it's going to be interesting to see how Jalen Lane is going to be able to, you could say, replace De'Ami Brown in a way, because he's not as tall as De'Ami Brown. But here I'm about to pull up. If you're watching the YouTube version of this, which if you're not, you can subscribe to the Keeping Up with Commanders YouTube channel. But I'm about to pull up here the RAS for Jalen Lane. Here it is. I'm going to read out loud for the people that are listening to the audio version of this as well. But Jalen Lane last season, where'd it go? All right, Jalen Lane had an RAS of 9.56, which if you don't know what RAS is, let me explain it to you real quick. It's relative athletic score. Basically, this guy on Twitter, I believe is MathBomb, but he kind of created this metric system to show off players' athleticism, because often you hear about, this player's super athletic, and this player's a lot of athleticism. He's got all the athletic tools, but what does that actually mean? So this guy, I believe, is like Kent Lee something, at MathBomb though on Twitter if you want to follow him. He came up with this metric system that basically breaks down each kind of event at the NFL Combine. So your height, your weight, your bench press, hand size, 40-yard dash, vertical broad jump, shuttle, 3-cone. It breaks down all of these metrics and these drills that they have at the Combine, and it kind of puts you in these groups. So on a scale, it measures you on a scale from 0 to 10, and a 10 being you're in the 100th percentile. So 10, of course, being the best, and that means you are ranked in the 100th percentile. That's if you have a 10. So a 9.56 would be in the 95th percentile among all wide receivers. So as you can see, also 40-yard dash, for example, Jalen Lane ran a 4.34. His RAS for just that drill, running a 40-yard dash, was a 9.87. That means he is in the 98th percentile among all wide receivers running the 40-yard dash. So basically, he's in the 98th percentile in terms of time running the 40-yard dash. But something else I want to point out is his 10-yard split, a 1.53, which is in the 90th percentile. That means he's got quick explosion out of his feet as well. The vertical jump and the broad jump also kind of support that. The vertical jump, 40-inch vertical for Jalen Lane, which if you look at his height, like I mentioned, I believe, he's only 5'9", about 5'10", 191 pounds, which again, because of those, his RES was kind of went down, but he made up for it in all of these drills that he did with a vertical jump of 40-inch vertical jump, which is a 96th percentile, and a broad jump of 11 feet, which is 97th percentile, pretty much 98th percentile. So Jalen Lane is a very athletic player, and this is kind of the trend for Washington's draft class. Last year for Washington, they had Adam Peters had a draft class which only had athletes rated in the 80th percentile among athletes or better, or he'd only drafted prospects in the 80th percentile or better. So basically, prospects that had an RAS score of 8 or better, which is good because, again, majority of these athletes rated in the 8 or better category for RAS metrics, or in the 80th percentile or better, are going to be good in this league because they have the athleticism to compete at the NFL level. So Jalen Lane met this metric, and spoiler alert now, but all of the draft prospects that Adam Peters selected in this draft class as well in 2025 met this metric and were at least in the 88th percentile among athletes. So that's why I'm excited for Jalen Lane as well, because as a punt returner, if he can take just 1 or 2 punts to the house next year, that is better punt returner production that Washington has had since, I don't know, in a long time at their punt return position. Jamison Crowder was great in all last year. I thought he was surprisingly good for Washington, especially down the stretch at punt returner when they needed one. But Jalen Lane now is a true punt returner who's also going to be able to maybe take some of these screen passes, break a couple of tackles and pick up an extra, 8 or so yards, which he averaged after the catch. So Jalen Lane is someone that I am super excited about for the Washington Commanders. I know the fan base is super excited for Jalen Lane and what he can bring to Washington. Oh my goodness, the camera's not focused right now, but I'm super excited for what Jalen Lane can bring to Washington in the production that Jalen Lane can bring, because even though he might not have 600 yards next year or 700 yards for the Washington Commanders, the stuff that he'll do as a punt returner and kick returner is going to also kind of balance that out. So I'm excited to see what he can do as the punt returner, kick returner. Hopefully he doesn't, muff any punts or muff any kicks, or we know that we will have a safe option when we're trying to get the ball back, because that has not always been the case for Washington over the past, whatever, how long ever it's been since we've actually had a good punt returner. So the next guy for Washington that Adam Peters selected was in the 6th round, and that is Kane Medrano, the linebacker out of UCLA. Again, his raw athletic score was also the 90th plus percentile overall. You look at the stuff that Medrano has: 6'3", 230 pounds. Again, out of UCLA, he's a redshirt senior for the Bruins last year. Coverage stops, 15, tied 51st. Forced incompletions for linebackers, he had 4, which was tied for 26. He had 2 interceptions last year for the Bruins as well. You look at this, I think the first thing that maybe sticks out to you looking at his PFF draft profile is that missed tackle rate at 26%, right? He was not the best tackler last year, but you look at Medrano and what he did at the combine, which again, this is a common trend, by the way, for Washington and Adam Peters. This is a common thing. Like I'm gonna keep on talking about the combine. I know many people are gonna be like, "Oh, well, it matters actually what he did on the field rather than what he did at the combine." But I'm gonna bring up here the Kane Medrano's RAS report as well. But for Medrano, you look at the 40-yard dash, a 4.46 40-yard dash at 222 pounds, which I mentioned earlier as well, how a lot of players in this draft class are going to have to put on some weight to compete at the NFL level. Medrano is one of those guys where I feel he's going to have to put on some weight. But you look at all of the rest of this, under 7-second three cone, right? 10-yard split of 1.52, which is in the 99th percentile pretty much among linebackers. Overall, Medrano's in the 98th percentile among linebackers with his RAS score. So Medrano is an athlete, and you now look at Medrano, you pair him up now with Jordan McGee from Temple last season, who Washington drafted in the, if I get this right, 5th round, I believe. 5th round, I want to say. Could be a round off on that. I believe they drafted McGee in the 5th round, though. So you have McGee, who is also a very speedy linebacker who was kind of hurt with injury last season. You pair him up with Medrano, who, again, he was at UCLA for the last about 4 or so years, since pretty much 2021. Ken Norton Jr., the current Commanders linebacker coach, was the linebackers coach at UCLA for that period of time before heading over to Washington. So you got to look at that connection there pretty much. And Medrano actually sent a text to Ken Norton Jr. about 10 picks before Washington ended up selecting him, saying, "Come get me." Washington ends up selecting Medrano, and the rest is history, or hopefully this will be good history for Washington. So Caden Medrano in the 6th round for the Washington Commanders. They get some linebacker depth. Washington gets some linebacker depth, or much needed linebacker depth for the Commanders. Yeah, so some pretty good stuff there. I think linebacker was definitely a need. I had a guy like Jalen Walker being selected by Washington out of Indiana. He was one of the highest grade linebackers last year at PFF. I had him being selected in one of my mocks later on in 6th, 7th round. They went with Medrano instead, which is fine. I've been learning a lot about Caden Medrano over the last couple of hours since he's been picked, but yeah. So Medrano is going to be someone who I'm looking forward to watching in the preseason. At worst, I think he's going to be a special teamer for Washington, which you look at a guy like Nick Bellore, who's also a linebacker who is a very good special teamer. He can kind of mentor a guy maybe like Caden Medrano. So let's move on to the 7th round and final selection for the Washington Commanders, and that is Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, the running back out of Arizona for Washington. So Krosky-Merritt is someone who I mentioned at the top of the pod. He has had a very interesting story for Washington and basically his college career leading up to this point. As you can see if you're watching the YouTube version, I have his PFF NFL draft profile up. He only played in one game last year. He only played in one game, and he had an 88.9 PFF grade. He ran for over 100 yards. He scored a touchdown, and that was against New Mexico. So Krosky-Merritt, who transferred to Arizona last season, played at New Mexico the season before that, and then I believe played at Alabama State for the 4 years before that. So Krosky-Merritt is 24 years old, just turned 24 years old, and has been playing in college since 2019. It sounds crazy, yes, and for a running back, it is definitely something to note. But for Krosky-Merritt, it was his 2023 year, which really broke him out and kind of put him on the scene for who he was and pretty much on the map for NFL teams. In 2023, he finished with 1,191 yards on only 188 carries. That is averaging over 6 yards per carry. He scored 17 touchdowns for New Mexico in 2023, and he played in, of course, 12 games. That is crazy. That is some crazy numbers for Krosky-Merritt. So he transferred to Arizona, and why did he only play one game? Well, after playing that one game, the NCAA and Arizona have pretty much the NCAA was holding him back due to eligibility issues. Like I mentioned, last season was his 6th year of college football, and I did some research on why Krosky-Merritt was held back and did not end up playing for the rest of the 2024 season. And apparently in 2019, Krosky-Merritt reportedly played in 4 games for Alabama State. He played in 4 games for Alabama State. Now, on ESPN's stat sheet, it says he played in 8 games. So if you want a red shirt, right? If you want a red shirt, you only can play in 4 games for a year before your red shirt gets burned. So, and of course, redshirting means, you guys know what redshirting means, but you basically get an extra year of eligibility. So in 2019, he played in 4 games, but he changed his number within those games. So I believe he was wearing number 2 at the time, and he changed his number. But supposedly, in 2019, after he changed his number, he only played in 4 games. But ESPN stats say that a different player wearing the same number was still Krosky Merritt. So basically, they thought Krosky Merritt was a different player. So no, they thought a different player was Krosky Merritt. Ultimately, having Krosky Merritt participate in 8 games on their stat sheets. So that's what led to this kind of ineligibility for this final year, because this is how it went. So he redshirted his first year, supposedly, right? Playing in only 4 games in 2019. 2020 is a year that he gets back, right, for eligibility, because that was the COVID year. So he's only really had no years of eligibility. And then since he's played in 4 seasons, 2 at Alabama State, 1 at New Mexico, and then 1 at Arizona. So technically, this was his 6th and final season. However, due to some stats errors back in 2019 when he redshirted, he's ineligible to play last season for Arizona. So it was a very messy situation that really was a mistake. But the how the NCAA has dealt with eligibility issues over the last few years. It has turned just into an entire mess. You have players in college basketball entering the transfer portal without eligibility. You have the COVID year kind of messing things up as well, giving everybody an extra year of eligibility. Since Krosky Merritt was playing college football during that COVID year, he got an extra year of eligibility, ultimately allowing him to have 6 years of eligibility. However, the NCAA only believed he had 5. So that is kind of what led to him only being able to play in 1 game, which technically he wasn't even allowed to play in this 1 game, but the NCAA didn't know, even though Krosky Merritt still should have been able to play in the entire season last year. So it was a messy situation, but ultimately Krosky Merritt was invited to the Shrine Bowl, East-West Shrine Bowl, over the offseason. He participated there in the pre-draft process down in Frisco, Texas. He had a very good game and was one of the risers in Frisco, Texas during the Shrine Bowl. Washington ended up having a top 30 visit with Krosky Merritt as well. So top 30 visits do actually matter for Adam Peters. That is important to note now, as we start to see some trends now with two draft classes in for Adam Peters. So a top 30 visit for Krosky Merritt as well. And Washington ends up selecting him in the 7th round to add on to a running back room that has Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, Jerry McNichols, and Chris Rodriguez. So there was a lot of fans clamoring for a 3rd running back to compete with Chris Rodriguez and Jerry McNichols, and they got it with Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. So that is that as well. So Krosky Merritt is a Washington Commander. It's been a wild year for him in terms of his eligibility in college football and everything, but he's a very good player, and I'm excited to see what he can bring in the preseason. I'm excited to see all 3 of those guys kind of fight out for that RB3 position. And ultimately, could Krosky Merritt be the replacement for Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson? Because right now for Washington, Robinson, Eckler, McNichols, Rodriguez, all 4 of these running backs, their contracts are expiring at the end of this season. So Washington needed to get younger at the position, and they have, or I mean, I guess not really, you could say, with Krosky Merritt being 24 years old, but ultimately, you guys know what I mean. They got younger, and they kind of reset the position in terms of the contract and all of that as well. So it'll be interesting to see if Krosky Merritt can fight out a position on the roster. Michael Wiley was someone who was a Arizona running back last season who was fighting for a position on the roster for Washington as well. Ultimately did not make it and was kind of a practice squad guy throughout the season. But back-to-back years where Washington selected the Arizona Wildcats starting running back, even though this year's starting running back didn't even get a chance to really play because of eligibility issues. But that'll do it. That'll do it for the Washington Commanders draft class. Josh Connolly Jr., the first round pick. Trey Amos, the 2nd-round pick. Jalen Lane, the 3rd-round pick. Jalen Lane, the 4th-round pick. Kane Madrano, the 6th-round pick. And Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, the 7th-round pick. So that is the draft class for Washington. I do want to get into some of the UDFAs that Washington signed so far. I've been trying to keep up as this as this has kind of as I've kind of recorded this podcast. But as of now, it looks like Fentrell Cypress III, the cornerback out of Florida State, who I believe was at the Senior Bowl as well. He signed a UDFA contract with the Washington Commanders, and also Tim McKay, an offensive lineman out of NC State, has signed a contract with the Washington Commanders. It looks like as well a lot of the big time UDFAs have already signed. Xavier Restrepo is gone. Jake Majors is gone. Zy Alexander, I know, was someone Washington was meeting with sometimes at I believe one of the All-Star games. He's been signed. Donovan Edwards has been signed. So it looks like a lot of the top, UDFAs have already signed deals with teams, but that is what Washington has got going on right now. So yeah, this is the draft class for the Washington Commanders. I'm excited for it. I think it's got a lot of potential. And even though maybe it was kind of a more boring year, you could say, in terms of action regarding Washington's draft, just because they only had 5 picks and they didn't end up trading up or trading down with any of their picks, this should be interesting. I think there are definitely, I would say, Connolly, Amos, and Lane are going to be 3 players who are going to contribute right away. As far as Medrano and Krosky-Merritt, I think both of those guys will be fighting for roster spots in training camp and during the preseason. But I'll take a look here at the depth chart real quick. We can take a look at the depth chart for Washington. Let me bring it up real quick. But after the draft, wide receiver is now Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Noah Brown, Luke McCaffrey, Jalen Lane, KJ Osborne, Taz Allen, Michael Gallup, Chris Moore, and Mike Strachan as well. So it looks like I think 6 of these guys will probably make it. So it'll probably be a battle between Jalen Lane will probably make it, but it'll probably be a battle between KJ Osborne, Michael Gallup. I would not expect Taz Allen to make it. So just KJ Osborne and Michael Gallup and maybe Chris Moore battling for a 6th spot at the wide receiver position. As far as the offensive line now goes, you've got, Laramie Tunsil, left tackle, Nick Allegretti. Now Brennan Coleman and Nick Allegretti. That'll be something to watch. I'm going to come out with a, OTA battles to watch heading into OTAs and rookie minicamp and all of that episode in the next couple of weeks. But left guard will definitely be a position to watch, and right tackle as well in terms of training camp battles. Will it be Brandon Coleman or Nick Allegretti at left guard? Could Nate Herbig maybe potentially be the starter at left guard? Tyler Biotish will be the center. Sam Cosmi, who's going to start at right guard? Will Sam Cosmi be ready for the start of the season, or will Andrew Wiley kick inside and be the right guard for Washington? And then at right tackle, I assume it's going to be Josh Connolly, but will Brandon Coleman actually play at right tackle and not left guard? So that is going to be something to watch. The battle for RB3 is going to be huge as well. Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and Michael Wiley as well. Demetric Felton as well is on Washington's team. And then at the corners, you now got Marshawn Lattimore, Noah Benogany, Trey Amos, Mike Sanderstill, Jonathan Jones. I feel like those 5 are kind of set. And then Kane Medrano and linebacker, I think, is someone. Kane Medrano beat out a guy like Dom Hampton for that final linebacker position. The 6th-round pick, Medrano, the former 5th-round pick, Dom Hampton. And it looks like Jordan McKee was a 5th-round pick, so I was right about that as well. But Kane Medrano, Dom Hampton, Jordan McGee, Nick Bellore will all be fighting for the final, I would say, probably 2 linebacker spots on this team. So there's going to be a lot of good battles for Washington, and as a Washington fan to keep an eye on here in minicamp and throughout, the offseason, the rest of the offseason leading up to week number 1 and the final 53-man roster. So I'm excited for that. But that'll wrap up the draft class review episode here on Keeping Up with the Commanders. It's been a great offseason so far leading up to this draft. I'm excited to keep on breaking these prospects down, or now players down, for Washington, and look at some headlines heading into rookie minicamp and OTAs for the Washington Commanders. So that'll do it for today's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. See you guys in the next one. Peace.